What's up, everybody? We are in Acts chapter 27. We're going to do 27 and 28 today, which will complete the Acts of the Apostles given to us by Luke, the Apostle Luke. We're on page 1086 approximately in the 2009 version of the scriptures, somewhere near that in the 2016. And if you have any other version, I don't know, bro. But Acts 27. All right, so remember in 26, Paul gives his testimony in front of Agrippa, and Agrippa ends by saying this at the end of 26. And Agrippa said to Festus, "This man could have been released if he had not appealed to Caesar." Meaning, we could let this dude go right now if he hadn't already appealed to be sent to Rome to speak to Caesar. And so we pick up in chapter 27. And when it was decided that we, Luke, Paul, et al., should sail to Italy, they delivered Shaul, Paul, and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a captain of the Augustan regiment, also the creator of the Orange Julius. Now you know. And having embarked in a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail along the coasts of Asia, did set sail. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessaloniki, was with us, and on the next day we landed at Sidon. And Julius treated Shaul kindly and allowed him to go to his friends and receive attention. And from there we put out to sea and sailed close to Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And having sailed over the sea along Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Mura of Lycia. And there the captain, having found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, did put us on board. And so now they switched ships. And having sailed slowly many days, and arriving with difficulty off of Knidos, the wind not allowing us to proceed, we sailed close to Crete, off of Salmone. And passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. And much time having passed, and the sailing now being dangerous, because the fast was already over, Shaul advised them, saying, "Men, I see that this voyage is going to end with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives." They've been burning time. It's now the fall. Which fast? The fast of atonement. That's which fast. How do we know so? Because it's a capital F fast. It's not a fast that they chose to do. It's a fast that Yah commanded them to do. Atonement, which you can find in Leviticus 23. If you would like, backed up by Jeremiah. Essentially, afflict your beings, make your souls hurt by not eating food for a day, and being mindful while that is going on that everything you have comes from the Most High anyway. But see, this is a fall feast, and in the fall, the winds and the currents change, and it gets much more difficult to sail a ship, an actual wooden ship with sails. So Shaul, Paul, is like, "Hey man, I can read the writing on the wall. This voyage is not going to go well for us." Verse 11. But the captain was persuaded by the pilot and the owner of the ship rather than what Shaul said. And because the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the greater part, the majority of those involved, advised to set sail from there too, if somehow they were able to reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing southwest and northwest, to pass the winter. And a south wind blowing softly, thinking they had obtained their purpose, "Oh, it's just a gentle south wind, we got this." Having lifted anchor, they sailed along Crete, close inshore. And not long after, a stormy headwind rushed down from it, called a northeaster. If you ever lived in the Northeast, a nor'easter is a big old nasty storm. You don't want any part of it. It's essentially a wintry hurricane. It's a bad deal. And when the ship was caught in it and unable to head against the wind, we let her go and were driven. They quit fighting it and let the storm take it wherever it would. And having run under a small island called Clauda, we were hardly able to control the small boat. Meaning they run aground, they let the small boat down to get off of the ship and onto land. And having hoisted it, they used helps to undergird the ship. You would cut, I need a thing. I don't have a thing. If the hull of the ship is shaped like this, they would cut poles and stick them underneath the ship to keep the ship from rocking back and forth. Having hoisted it, they used helps to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on Syrtis, they lowered the tackle, and so were driven. They let the sails down, and just wherever we go, we go. And because we were exceedingly storm-tossed, the next day they began to throw overboard. And on the third day we threw out the ship's tackle with our own hands, chucked the sails. When, now, neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm beat on us, all expectancy that we would be saved was taken away. And when there had been a long abstinence from food, then Shaul, standing in the midst of them, said, Truly, men, you should have listened to me, not to have sailed from Crete and sustained this damage and loss. And now I urge you to take courage, for there shall be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For tonight a messenger of Elohim, an angel, to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood by me, saying, Do not be afraid, Shaul. You have to be brought before Caesar. And look, Elohim has favorably given you all those who sail with you. Therefore, take courage, men, for I believe Elohim that it shall be according to the way it was spoken to me. However, we need to run aground on some island. He said, Look, we're not all going to die, but this ship is a loss. An angel of the Most High Yah, whom I serve, came to me and made it clear to me we're going to make it through. But in order for that to happen, we need to run aground on some island. Remember, they don't have any tackle. They don't have any sails. Okay? And when the 14th night came, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected that they were drawing near some land. So taking soundings, they found it to be 20 fathoms. A sounding, essentially, you lower a rope with a weight at the bottom. You measure where the rope stops going into the water, pull it back up, and measure how much rope was lowered in the water. It gives you a depth. And a little farther on, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms, meaning that we are coming up onto a shelf of land as we sail. And fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and were praying for day to come. Remember, they can't steer the ship. They got no tackle. So they didn't want to wreck the ship either, so they threw 4 anchors from the stern, the back of the boat, and were praying for day to come. But when the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea, under pretense of going to cast out anchors from the prow, Shaul said to the captain and the soldiers, If these men do not remain in the ship, it is impossible for you to be saved. Then the soldiers did cut the ropes of the boat and let it fall. And when day was about to come, Shaul urged them all to take food, saying, Today is the 14th day you have continued without food and eaten none at all. So I urge you to take food, for this concerns your safety, since not a hair shall fall from the head of any of you. And having said this, he took bread and gave thanks to Elohim in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. And they were all encouraged, and all took food themselves. A long abstinence from food. Part of that could be because they've been in a storm for 14 days. It's very difficult to cook and bake when you've been in a storm for 14 days. Part of that could be that they were so seasick that they couldn't eat because they've been in a storm for 14 days. However, after 14 days, Shaul, which is no mean feat, I mean, no small feat, rather, that's a long time to go without food. Shaul breaks some bread, thanks Elohim, and he eats, and leading by example, everybody else eats too. And they were all encouraged, and also took food themselves. And all of us were 276 beings, souls, in the ship. And being satisfied with food, they were lightening the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. And when day came, they did not recognize the land, but they noted a certain bay with a beach, onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And having cast off the anchors, they left them in the sea, meanwhile untying the rudder ropes. They hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But coming upon a place where 2 seas met, they grounded the ship, and the prow stuck fast, and remained immovable, but the stern was broken by the pounding of the surf. And the soldiers intended to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the captain, intending to save Shaul, kept them from their intention and commanded those able to swim to jump first and get to land, and the rest, some indeed on boards and some on items of the ship, and so it came to be that all reached the land in safety. They shipwrecked. They stuck the nose of that thing right into the coast. The waves are smashing against the back of the boat, broke it apart. The whole ship's coming apart. The soldiers were going to let the prisoners drown, but the captain said, "No way, Jose. People are literally jumping off the ship, floating on boards like it's the Titanic to get to shore." It's a mess. It's not a good thing. And the fact that Shaul, lest anybody else survived, is literally a miracle. Chapter 2:8. Let's have a little water. And having come to safety, they then learned that the island was called Melite, or Melite, or Melite, or Melite, whatever. And the foreigners showed us extraordinary kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us all, because of the rain that was falling and because of the cold. But Shaul, having gathered a bundle of sticks, and having laid them on the fire, an adder, a snake, came out because of the heat, and fastened itself onto his hand. He got snake bit. There was a snake in the firewood that he was picking up. And when the foreigners saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man is certainly a murderer, whom, though saved from the sea, still right ruling does not allow to live." They're essentially saying, man, karma's a B word. This dude clearly is a murderer because he survived the shipwreck, but now a snake's going to kill him. Then indeed he, Shaul, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no evil. And expecting that he would swell up or suddenly fall down dead, they, the locals, waited for a long time and saw no harm come to him. Changing their minds, they said that he was a mighty one, or a god. And in the neighborhood of that place there were lands of the chief of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and housed us in a friendly way for 3 days. And it came to be that the father of Publius lay sick with inflammation and dysentery. Shaul went into him, and having prayed, he laid his hands on him and healed him. And when this took place, the rest of those on the island who had diseases also came and were healed, who also respected us in many ways. And when we were setting sail, they provided us with our needs. After 3 months, we set sail in an Alexandrian ship which had wintered at the island, whose figurehead was Dioscuri, which means twin brothers, who were sons of Zeus, named Castor and Pollux. They were the tutelary deities of sailors. Little footnote there for you. And having landed at Syracuse, we stayed 3 days. I'm just going to pause for a minute. The way this reads is very much like a transcript, and there is a course of thinking that the whole reason the Acts of the Apostles was written by Luke in the first place was to curate and document the acts of Paul on behalf of the early church for his very defense to the Romans. That's why this book exists in the first place. And it's more readable in some places than others, but at least this portion that we're ending with right now, Acts 27-28, very much so sounds like a transcript. And I think that lends some credence to the idea that Luke wrote this to present to the Romans who were going to judge Paul, to say, hey man, I've been documenting this the whole time. Here's a written account of everything that has happened. And having landed at Syracuse, we stayed 3 days, from which place we went round and arrived at Rhegium. And after 1 day the south wind blew, and the 2nd day we came to Puteoli, where we found brothers, and were invited to stay with them 7 days. And so we went to Rome. And when the brothers there heard about us, they came to meet us from as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns. When Shaul saw them, he thanked Elohim and took courage. And when he came to Rome, the captain delivered the prisoners to the captain of the guard, but Shaul was allowed to stay by himself with the soldiers guarding him. And it came to be after 3 days that Shaul called the leaders of the Yehudim together. And when they had come together, he said to them, Men, brothers, though I have done none at all against our people, or the practices of our fathers, I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, into the hands of the Romans. Let's just pause right there a minute. Men, brothers, though I have done none at all against our people or the practices of our fathers, I was delivered as a prisoner. Now we're going to see he goes a little bit deeper on this, even more so in a few verses. But understand, and we will get into this because the very next book after this is Romans. Romans, Galatians, Ephesians. There's many people that say, yeah, you know, Bear, you keep that Torah because you don't understand what Paul said. No, I do understand what Paul said, and I believe it's Rob Skiba who said, you shouldn't read a word of Paul, not one word of Paul, until you are intimately familiar with what Paul read every day and what Paul knew, aka the Tanakh, the Torah, and the Nevi'im and the Ketubim, the Old Testament, the Torah and the prophets. I've read all that stuff. And because I've read all of that stuff, and I've read all of the New Testament too, I can actually put Shaul's words in context of what he was trying to say. And he testifies over and over again, literally testifies in court under punishment of death, that he has not transgressed the Torah at all. So the idea that Paul would be the one saying that the Torah has been done away with is only arrived at by cherry-picking verses of Paul out of context. So here again we have in verse 17, men, brothers, though I have done none at all against our people or the practices of our fathers, I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans, who, when they had examined me, intended to let me go, because there was no cause for putting me to death. But the Yehudim spoke against it, and I was compelled to appeal to Caesar. Not that I had any accusation against my nation. This, therefore, is the reason I called for you, to see you and speak with you. It is because of the expectation of Israel that I am bound with this chain. The expectation is both the coming Messiah and the resurrection of the dead. That is the expectation that he refers to over and over again. In fact, if we flip back just a little bit to Acts 24, verse 14, under oath, Paul is testifying yet again to the Yehudim, and this I confess to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, so I worship the Elohim of my fathers, believing all that has been written in the Torah and the prophets, having an expectation, there's that word again, in Elohim, which they themselves also wait for, that there is to be a resurrection of the dead, both the righteous and the unrighteous. And in this I exercise myself to have a clear conscience towards Elohim and men always. The resurrection of the dead was the key issue here. The Sadducees didn't believe in it at all, and some of the Pharisees did believe that Yeshua had resurrected as Hamashiach, as the anointed, as the Messiah, and some of them didn't. And as far as the righteous and the unrighteous, that's because there will be a judgment at the end of an age. Everybody will rise, and you are going to be judged. Period, the end. Righteousness or unrighteousness. Blamelessly walking in the commands of the Most High or not. So Paul, the whole reason that Paul is in hot water is because he has been preaching the resurrection of Yeshua. And that is not sitting well with the Yehudim. Remember, there are 4 factions within the Yehudim. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Zealots, and the Essenes. And many of them don't believe in resurrection at all. And those that do, not many of them believe that Yeshua did resurrect as Hamashiach, as the Messiah. That's the uphill battle that Paul has been fighting. Yet he says over and over again, believing all that has been written in the Torah and the prophets. So, yet again, here we are back in Acts 28. But the Yehudim spoke against it, and I was compelled to Caesar, not that I had any accusation against my nation. This, therefore, is the reason I called for you, to see you and speak with you. It is because of the expectation of Israel that I am bound with this chain. And they said to him, this being the leaders of the Yehudim, they said to him, we neither received letters from Judah concerning you, nor have any of the brothers who came reported or spoken whatever wicked about you. I mean, you're good, bro. We didn't get any bad news about you. And we think it right to hear from you what you think. For indeed, concerning this sect, we know that it is spoken against everywhere. They're like, we'd like to hear what you have to say, because concerning the way which you believe, we hear people talking bad about it everywhere. So give us the skinny, what's up? And having appointed him a day, many came to him where he was staying, to whom he was explaining, earnestly witnessing about the kingdom of Elohim, and persuading them concerning Yeshua, from both the Torah of Moses and the prophets, from morning until evening. Again, understand that Yeshua has to conform to the prophesied expectations of the Torah and the prophets. The whole idea that Messiah has done away with the law is ludicrous. You cannot have a biblical Messiah that does away with the law. It's for this reason that the Jews to this day openly reject Christianity, because the biblical Messiah, the Old Testament Messiah, cannot do away with the law. If he does, they're commanded to stone him to death and kill him. Which means that we're left with this conundrum of either we have a Christian Messiah that did do away with the law but is non-biblical, or we have a biblical Messiah that didn't do away with the law and is non-Christian. I know, heavy stuff. But Messiah, HaMashiach, is a king, an anointed one, a chosen one that restores the Father's people to the Father by restoring the law. And this is backed up by Yeshua himself in Matthew 5:17. For truly, truly I say to you, until heaven and earth passes away, not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from the Torah till all be done. The same heaven and earth that Moses calls to witness against the Israelites when he receives the law and gives it to them again before they go into the promised land. It's a continuation from Moses to Yeshua to restore the Father's people, Israel, to the Father through the law. And yes, he did rail against the Pharisees and the Sadducees because their law had been perverted with the doctrines and dogmas of men. He was returning the Father's people to the Father through righteousness, which we know from Luke 1 verse 6 is blamelessly walking in the commands of Yah. Not adding your own to it. In fact, we're commanded, do not add or take away from the word of this Torah. That's exactly what the Pharisees and the Sadducees did, and that's exactly why Yeshua was up in their business, because they were wrong and he was right. 23, and having appointed him a day, many came to him where he was staying, to whom he was explaining, earnestly witnessing about the reign of Elohim, and persuading them concerning Yeshua, from both the Torah of Moses, and the prophets, from morning until evening. And some indeed were persuaded by what was said, but some believed not. And disagreeing with one another, they began to leave, after Shaul had spoken one word. The set-apart Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, rightly spoke through Isaiah the prophet to our fathers, saying, Go to this people and say, Hearing you shall hear, but shall by no means understand, and seeing you shall see, but by no means perceive. For the heart of this people has become thickened, and with their ears they heard heavily, and they have closed their eyes, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn back, and I should heal them. Therefore let it be known to you that the deliverance of Elohim has been sent to the nations, and they shall hear. And when he said these words, the Yehudim went away, and had a great dispute among themselves. And Shaul stayed 2 entire years in his own rented house, and was receiving all who came to him, proclaiming the kingdom of Elohim, and teaching about the Master Yeshua Messiah with all boldness, unhindered. And that is the end of the book of Acts. Which does beg a question. It's the end of the book of Acts, but is it the end of Shaul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul? Well, we can look over here at Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica. How did the Apostle Paul die? Quote, the exact details of St. Paul's death are unknown, but tradition holds that he was beheaded in Rome and thus died as a martyr for his faith. His death was perhaps part of the executions of Christians, ordered by the Roman Emperor Nero following the Great Fire in the city in 64 CE, Common Era. It is known that St. Paul was imprisoned in Rome and wrote several of his epistles or letters during his captivity there, which we will be reading next. And then we can also look at graceandknowledge.faithweb.com. Let's see here. Paul expressed a desire to travel to Spain in Romans 15:24, but he does not seem to have had the opportunity to do so before 62 AD. Clement's statement supports a scenario in which Paul was released at a first trial in Rome and then made a trip to Spain before a second imprisonment. The scenario was favored by Eusebius of Caesarea, the 4th century bishop and historian whose ecclesiastical history is an invaluable compilation of early Christian history. In Book 2, Chapter 22 of this work, Eusebius wrote, "Festus was sent by Nero to be Felix's successor. Under him, Paul, having made his defense, was sent bound to Rome," which we just read about. "Aristarchus was with him, who he also somewhere in his epistles quite naturally called his fellow prisoner. And Luke, who wrote the Acts of the Apostles, brought his history to a close at this point, after stating that Paul spent 2 whole years at Rome as a prisoner at large and preached the word of God without restraint. Thus, after he had made his defense, it is said that the apostle was sent again upon the ministry of preaching, and that upon coming to the same city, Rome, a second time, he suffered his martyrdom." So we have church history here essentially saying that Paul was martyred for his faith. That's probably likely because we can read here, in support of his conclusions, Eusebius cites some of the same evidence we have been considering, including 2 Timothy 4:16 and 17, and the fact that at Paul's trial, it occurred before the time when Nero became a persecutor of Christians. On the second point, Eusebius commented, "It is probable that indeed Nero was more disposed to mildness in the beginning. Paul's defense of his doctrine was more easily received, but then when he had advanced to the commission of lawless deeds of daring, he made the apostles as well as others the subject of his attacks." Meaning, lawless deeds of daring being against the laws of the Romans, that he's supposed to be arrested, and yet he's preaching the word unrestrained. Our sources also indicate that some of the episodes from the final season, I don't know why they're using that nomenclature, include a trip to Spain as well as visits to Philippi in Macedonia and Ephesus and Colossae in Asia Minor. According to Christian tradition, the final episode chronicles another arrest in Rome, this one leading to martyrdom. Eusebius, Ecclesiastical History, chapter 2:25, states, "It is therefore recorded, the best words tremendous, that Paul was beheaded in Rome itself, and that Peter likewise was crucified under Nero. This account of Peter and Paul is substantiated by the fact that their names are preserved in the cemeteries of that place even to this present day." So there you go. What happened to Shaul of Tarsus? Probably that. Maybe. Thanks for being along for the ride. I appreciate y'all. We will pick up in Romans next week. Shalom.